Come on, I had to squeeze out one more Kirby video before the release of Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which I'm super excited about, by the way, even though Car Kirby does haunt my dreams. One thing that really caught my eye is how this game handles copy abilities. Not only did they finally give Kirby a gun, but you can upgrade copy abilities into more powerful versions, which is so cool and makes a ton of sense with the transition to 3D. Although, I'm just happy we finally get to see something completely new for the Kirby series. That being said, you can't abandon tradition, and Kirby's copy abilities have been the defining gameplay mechanic for the franchise since Kirby's Adventure in 1993. As such, loads and loads of different copy abilities have appeared throughout the series, and with such a wide variety, some are useful and really fun, and others aren't. So I'll be ranking every Kirby copy ability in terms of how good I think they are. These rankings are entirely subjective, so your list will almost certainly differ from mine. Also, for the sake of this video, I won't be including any final copy abilities, animal friend combinations, power combos, mix abilities, super abilities, Robobot modes, or dream friends. Mainly because I can make those into separate videos for more viewer engagement. So without further delay, this is the Kirby copy ability tier list. According to me. And only me. F tier is home to the abilities that I usually try to avoid, or their existence is either too gimmicky or ultimately pointless. Basically, these are the abilities I never want to use, and starting this tier off strong, or I guess not strong, it's Light Kirby. Light Kirby is by far the most forgettable copy ability, and for good reason. It only appears in Kirby's Adventure, and its only use is lighting up dark rooms. This ability is a glorified light switch that's used very sparingly in the game, and if you use it in a well-lit area, it does nothing. Mini Kirby is very similar to Light Kirby. It's an ability that only appears in one game, it's only used for solving a small, no pun intended, amount of puzzles throughout the game, and it's utterly useless in every other situation. All this ability does is make Kirby small, which removes his ability to swallow, slide kick, and float, with the only trade-off being the ability to fit through very narrow passageways. And when you enter a door, you automatically lose this ability. What was the point of this? Speaking of pointless abilities, Copy actually has a pretty solid reason for being in Kirby Superstar. When Copy is turned into a helper, it basically lets player 2 play as Kirby, with the ability to pick up and drop copy abilities on the fly. As a copy ability for Kirby though, Kirby doesn't need a copy ability to copy his enemy's powers. That's literally his main power. Now, Metal Kirby is the first ability on this list that genuinely has utility, and a lot of it. It's completely immune to most regular enemies, can ground pound to pound in stakes, and can roll up into a ball to roll down hills. On paper, it's a really good ability, until you realize that the ability makes Kirby slow as molasses and so heavy that he can barely fly. It doesn't matter how powerful an ability is, if it makes the simple act of walking through a level a boring slog, it deserves to rank this low. I'm probably gonna catch some flack for this one, because conceptually Ghost is a really cool copy ability. Taking control and playing as any enemy in the game is a really cool idea, until you realize that most enemies don't really attack so much as they just kinda menacingly walk towards Kirby, and the ones that can attack, why would I want to take control of Sword Knight when I can just use Sword Kirby? Great concept, but Kirby isn't really the kind of game that can take full advantage of it. And closing out the F tier, we have Sleep Kirby. Wow, Silvery, you put the copy ability that's literally useless over the one that lets you mind control any enemy in the game? Yeah, I guess I did. Unlike the abilities below this that were genuinely designed to be useful, Sleep Kirby is a 100% intentional joke ability, and I can appreciate that. Sleep is actually used in some really creative ways throughout the series as an obstacle of sorts. I'll gladly take an ability that's intentionally worthless over ones that are accidentally worthless. But at the end of the day, a useless ability is still a useless ability. Moving on up to D tier, these are abilities that are fine. They're not bad, but a lot of them are overshadowed by other abilities, or just simply haven't been in enough games to be as fleshed out. There are a decent amount of abilities that are one-time use, and aside from Light and I guess Mini and Copy, Paint is the most lackluster. You can only get the Paint copy ability in 2 parts of Kirby Superstar. It's decently useful against both bosses, but it's the extreme rarity for an ability that's not any better than the other more common single-use abilities that puts it this low on the list. Similarly, Festival is another one-time ability that's incredibly forgettable because of how infrequently it shows up. It's definitely a cute take on the one-time use ability concept, but this ability debuted in Star Allies. By this point, the best one-time abilities have already become series staples, and with said abilities appearing alongside Festival and Star Allies, it was kind of doomed to be underwhelming on arrival. Ball is a pretty popular and actually pretty strong and fast copy ability, but I really never liked it. I will fully admit, this is a 100% biased placement because every time I use this ability, I end up launching myself directly into a bottomless pit. But it is a surprisingly decent ability considering it's just Kirby, in ball form. Laser is an unfortunate case because it's a fine, perfectly functioning ability, shooting a single laser that bounces off of slopes. This has loads of puzzle-solving potential, but unfortunately that's all Laser has to offer. It hasn't appeared since Squeak Squad, and while it did gain the ability to fire charged shots in that game, it's an incredibly shallow ability that makes it kind of neat at best, and utterly outclassed by most other abilities in the game at worst. Bubble is another fine concept with underwhelming execution. Seems to be a trend for Kirby Squeak Squad, huh? Bubble Kirby wields a bubble wand, and any enemy hit will become a copy ability bubble that can be stored for later. This ability's main appeal is that it lets you stockpile other, better abilities. And it's not even super great at that. You'll need anywhere from 1 to 3 open spots in your 5-item inventory per level to fully complete Squeak Squad, so most of the bubbles you end up making will end up thrown out. I have a bit of a history with Bell Kirby, but I will say I think it's a fine ability. It just isn't fun to use outside of the Twin Tinker attack. Its attacks are slow, its versatility is non-existent, and it honestly sounds kind of annoying. Maybe I don't care for this ability because it subconsciously reminds me of myself, or maybe I don't care about it because it's not very fun to use. And finally, sitting proudly at the top of D tier, and I do literally mean sitting since it's all this ability can really do. Needle Kirby. You extend your spines and hope the enemies walk into you. Later games give it the ability to shoot out its spikes as projectiles and even perform a rolling needle dash attack, which was removed in Kirby Triple Deluxe. I'm sure with its return in Forgotten Land, it will see some improvements, but for now, Needle's a really boring basic ability. Moving up to C tier, these abilities are good. I don't have any aversion to using these, but I usually never want to ditch my current ability for the chance to use one of these. ESP is a wildly underwhelming ability, especially as one that was added in a modern Kirby game. A copy ability that harnesses telekinetic energy is a really cool concept, until you realize ESP Kirby really only has 2 attacks. Sure, it does have a really powerful counter that trivializes a lot of the boss fights, and its attacks aren't bad. But of all the Planet Robobot abilities to return for Star Allies, this is the one that made the cut? Throw is as simple of an ability as it gets. Throw Kirby picks up enemies, and then throws enemies. The games Throw Kirby appears in typically have pretty limited copy abilities, so it's a solid and fun option, but comparing Throw to the modern copy abilities, many of which offer the ability to throw enemies within a fully fleshed out moveset, then Throw Kirby's lack of versatility really starts to show itself. Cupid's another ability that's pretty good and useful in the games it appears in, but compared to the modern Kirby abilities, I mean there's one that literally has the exact same design inspiration and does it way better. Missile's a pretty fun ability, but only under the right circumstances, those circumstances being entirely based around level design. This copy ability only appears in Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, and it's good provided the level gives you enough space to use it. There's a lot of levels where Missile is incredibly difficult to use, and with one attack that's not very useful against bosses, it kind of has to stay here until it gets brought back for another Kirby game. Now, you're probably going to think, Silvery, this has to be some kind of mistake. This is a well-loved and iconic Kirby copy ability. You're nuts putting it this low. Well, it's my list, and I think Plasma Kirby is fine, I guess. In Kirby Superstar, this ability is really busted, but part of that is because of Kirby Superstar's block mechanic that makes Kirby immune to most forms of damage. Like, wow, it sure is fun sitting in the corner of a boss fight, mashing the D-pad, and just winning. However, my biggest gripe with Plasma comes from, believe it or not, Kirby Star Allies. There are a few copy abilities, namely Burning, Freeze, and Backdrop, that I didn't include for the tier list simply because in the modern Kirby games, actually not even just the modern Kirby games, as far back as Kirby Superstar, these abilities would essentially be erased and their attacks would be integrated into the movesets of Fire, Ice, and Suplex respectively. In Return to Dreamland, Plasma's abilities were combined with Spark Kirby, which, in addition to gaining new moves, made Spark a really great ability. But then Plasma itself returned in Star Allies, lost every move it had when it was paired with Spark, and just, why? Why would they bother bringing back Plasma when Spark was made to be the ultimate hybrid of the two? I don't get it, I don't like it, Plasma sucks. Circus is such a weird ability. It's so goofy with attacks like juggling, blowing balloons, and jumping through flaming hoops. It's way interesting, but none of the moves really connect to each other. It's just Kirby performing a bunch of random circus acts. The best way I can describe this ability is that it's a novelty. Circus Kirby is entertaining for a few minutes, and then I just want to switch to a more straightforward, better ability. If you're still watching after my Plasma tirade, feel free to comment a yeehaw for Whip Kirby. Also, like and subscribe, it really helps out the video, thanks. Whip Kirby is a good ability, being a long-range grappler, but it's never my go-to ability for any situation unless I have to use it. I think that stems from it being pretty weak. Like, it's decent against enemies, but against mini-bosses and bosses, it doesn't really pack the kind of punch I would expect from a weapon-based ability. The last ability on this list that debuted in Squeak Squad, and it's only in the middle of C tier. Would you believe me if I said that Animal Kirby is an ability that debuted in Kirby Squeak Squad that has a pretty interesting concept, but a lackluster execution? What the hell happened with this game? Animal Kirby is a good puzzle-solving ability thanks to its digging and especially its drill attack, which is one of the coolest moves Kirby's ever used. But it's not really good. Especially in combat, Animal is a really weak ability. I will say, this is probably the cutest copy ability, so that's gotta count for something, right? Leaf is a good copy ability, but I just would like to see more from it. Like ESP, it has a pretty limited attack list for a modern Kirby ability, and while it's certainly good and usable, it just leaves me wanting more. I mean, it leaves me wanting more. What a convenient and totally unscripted slip of the tongue. Wing is a really good ability in regards to running through levels as quickly as possible. But in terms of combat, it's pretty weak. As more of a grappler ability, it's kinda tough to use against bosses, but in terms of pure mobility, it's very solid. Jet is very similar to Wing. It's just an overall cooler ability that has more utility in battle. It's just not my go-to. Artist is an ability that's very similar to Circus. It's a wildly creative idea with some good attacks that unfortunately don't synergize very well with each other. This ends up making the ability feel a lot weaker than it actually is, which is really a shame for a copy ability that paints a fat Kirby for one of its attacks. Cook is a one-time use ability which probably shouldn't be this high since it offers way less versatility than most of the abilities ranked below it. But come on, Kirby wears a chef hat and boils enemies alive in a giant stew pot. What's not to love about it? And finally, finishing the C tier is Cutter. Cutter's one of the few abilities that has appeared in every main series Kirby game since Kirby's Adventure, and it has always been good. Cutter is mostly a projectile-based ability, so it's not the most exciting to use in battle given its limited melee options. It's a good ability for puzzle solving, and a good ability in general, but there's a ton I prefer more. B tier time! There's still 31 abilities left to go, huh? I guess that's something to be said for the quality of Kirby's copy abilities. Cleaning is an ability that, had it not reappeared in Kirby Star Allies with a fully revamped moveset, would have sat proudly in the F tier. Sure, it kind of feels like cheating since most of the new additions to the ability are based on the Animal Friend combinations from Dreamland 3, but the fact that they were able to take the simple act of Kirby sweeping and turn it into something fun is truly a testament of how far the series has come. Bomb is pretty similar to Cutter. They're both projectile-based abilities, but Bomb has zero melee prowess. So why do I like this ability more? The bombs just feel more powerful and satisfying, especially in the older games where they were a lot less cartoony. Also, Bomb Drop is one of my favorite attacks in the entire series. Crash is the definitive one-time use ability. It's a powerful ability that really sells the intensity through animation. It may be as straightforward as they come, but it's still pretty great. And Mike is like Crash, except you can use it 3 times and it looks a lot funnier. Ninja is one of the coolest copy abilities in the game, with a wide arsenal of attacks ranging from kunai, katanas, smokescreens, cherry blossoms. My only gripe with the ability is that its attacks don't really do a lot of damage, instead favoring weaker but fast hits. This isn't bad, after all, it's Ninja Kirby, but I prefer an ability with a little more firepower. That line would have been perfect if I followed up with Fire Kirby, but here's an umbrella instead. Parasol is an ability that's so weird. It feels like it should be a joke ability like Sleep, but Parasol is surprisingly competent. It's a good melee ability with a lot of defensive utility, especially when it comes to protecting Kirby from above. Admittedly, I might be putting Magic too high on this list. It first appeared in Amazing Mirror, where it was a simple one-time use ability that just did something random and magical. In Squeak Squad, however, they gave Magic an actual moveset, and maybe it's just because all of the other new abilities in Squeak Squad range from mediocre to hot garbage, but Magic really steals the show with creative, quirky attacks that have a surprising amount of utility. Out of all the abilities, this is the one I want to see return in the modern series with an updated moveset the most. Beam is oftentimes one of, if not the first ability you see in a lot of Kirby games, but it is by no means just a beginner power-up. Beam is surprisingly fun given its relative simplicity, even in games where it only has one attack. Water is an ability that surprisingly took a while to be introduced, but it was pretty worth the wait. Water Kirby is a strong ability with a lot of different moves, mobility options that make simply traversing levels fun, and it can surf over water, which is pretty great. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I actually like Poison more than Water. They share a lot of similar moves, but Poison has a bigger focus on laying traps to deal residual damage, and that's a bit more fun to me. Also, it has an attack called Tilted Tower. I'm not making that up. Finally, we reach the top of B tier, and we could only reach such a high point thanks to High Jump. High Jump is easily the most one-note and straightforward ability that's been featured in any of the modern Kirby games. It jumps high. That's it. It worked when copy abilities were much more limited in Kirby's Adventure, and it surprisingly still works now. High Jump doesn't have a lot of fancy attacks. It sets out to do one thing. And I gotta say that hopping through levels, especially vertically designed levels, and shredding bosses is fun enough to allow this ability to leap high above a lot of others. We're in the A tier now, top 20 baby, let's just get right into it. Wheel Kirby can turn into a wheel, charging through anything in its path, provided it's not a wall or a pit. It requires some skill to take on bosses with this ability, but in terms of just going through levels and mowing down whatever stands in your way, it's a top tier choice. Dr. Kirby. They gave Kirby a medical license. Dr. Kirby would have probably been decently high on the list just for the absurdity of it, but Doctor actually comes with versatile and useful attacks that, unlike Circus and Artist, work really well together. Who would have thought that an ability where Kirby wields a clipboard, mixes random chemicals hoping for something good to happen, and injects his foes with a concentrated rainbow would go this hard? Fire is one of, if not the most well-known Kirby ability. It appears in every game, usually pretty early, and it was the first and most frequent ability Kirby used throughout the anime. And yeah, it's really solid. Breathing fire is satisfying, the Fireball Dash is really great for mobility and damage, and while the modern games make this attack look a lot more intentional on Kirby's part, I'll always love that one of the attacks is just Kirby lighting himself on fire. Archer is a more realized version of Cupid Kirby. Comparing the attacks of the two, it isn't hard to tell that Archers look and feel a lot more powerful. Couple that with a variety of ways to fire arrows and incredible defensive utility, and Archer's a really great reimagining of how Kirby wielding a bow could be really fun. Suplex probably shouldn't be this high, but I love it simply for how brutal it is. It struggles with boss fights, but just the sheer power and audacity of Kirby pile driving, body slamming, and backbreaking needed to be this high on the list. Sword is iconic, and rightfully so. It's a loving homage to The Legend of Zelda with some truly unique and devastating attacks that flow into each other really well, making it an all-around strong ability suited for pretty much every situation. Spear is like Sword, but longer. It's a great offensive ability, able to have long range like Whip without sacrificing power. Not to mention, it has the best attack in the entire series, the Spear Copter. Sure, it might not be practical in a lot of situations, but its sheer entertainment value alone would put Spear this high, even without a powerful and competent ability backing up this absurd move. As much as I love Spear, Staff's just kind of an upgraded version. Granted, this one doesn't have a Staff Copter attack. Well, it kinda does. Huh. Staff is one of the new abilities introduced in Star Allies, and I really hope it sticks around. Being an ability based on Goku, not that Goku, it's a ton of fun. And while Spear has the Spear Copter, Staff has the Pole Vault, which is almost as goofy and certainly more useful. Spider was a surprising ability that I didn't expect to like as much as I did when I first played Star Allies. It's like Poison in regards to setting traps to deal residual damage, and while it does feel a little weaker, it offers something completely different. In terms of going through levels and beating enemies, Spider is unrivaled, at least in Star Allies for me. Shooting webs that can tie up enemies that can be kicked into other enemies, and then using the webs as springboards is incredibly satisfying. And it almost makes me forget that I'm playing Star Allies with how much fun I'm having. And finally, at the top of A tier, barely missing out on the top 10, Spark Kirby. I sang its praises before when I talked about why Plasma Kirby in Star Allies was a mistake, but it truly is a great ability. I may not be the biggest fan of how you charge up Spark and Plasma's most powerful attack, but I can't deny that it's really strong and satisfying. And uncharged, Spark can still create a strong electric shield around Kirby, and in the modern games fire thunderbolts upwards and downwards. Let's see what Plasma can do if you don't fully charge it. Yeah, now do you see why I think this was a major downgrade? We've entered the top 10, and kicking off my S tier abilities is Ice. Freeze is my number one go-to ability in Kirby's Adventure and Nightmare in Dreamland, a game where each ability only has one major use. And when Ice and Freeze were merged into one ability with a ton of new attacks, Ice skyrocketed to become an easy favorite. Good range, the ability to freeze and kick enemies like Spider, the fact that Kirby ice skates instead of running, it has a really bizarre command grab, it's just a great ability for every situation. Mirror debuted in Kirby Superstar and made a grand return in Kirby Planet Robobot. I liked it in Superstar, but in Planet Robobot, Mirror became my go-to. The attacks are so flashy and stylish and surprisingly useful, giving Kirby invulnerability in a lot of instances. Even the simple act of reflecting projectiles became way more satisfying. Mirror was a very welcomed returning ability, and I hope it shows up in the series again sometime soon. Stone is my most used ability for boss fights and the arena, so I would be doing it a disservice by putting it any lower than S tier. Stone Kirby turns into a rock that deals damage as it crashes into the ground. In stone form, Kirby is completely invulnerable to almost every attack from enemies and bosses. Sure, it's kind of cheap, but it turns Kirby from a mindless action game into a real test of patience and knowing when the best time to strike the enemy is. I like abilities that can change the entire game around themselves, and I'll always appreciate Stone for that. There is no Kirby ability that has the same sheer power as Hammer. Even without its more powerful attacks, like the Hammer Flip, which has become one of the most popular attacks to quickly shred through boss fights, Hammer is still a wildly strong and versatile ability. Sure, maybe Sword and Staff are a bit more graceful, but there's few things that can be compared to just bashing a Waddle Dee in with a big goofy hammer. What if Hammer, Stone, and Cutter were all combined into one ability, with some added unique melee attacks? If that sounds like Kirby in Super Smash Bros., that's good because that's exactly what Smash Bros. Kirby is. It kind of feels like cheating since Smash Bros. Kirby is just an amalgam of a bunch of strong abilities, but I would be lying if I said that didn't make it one of the strongest and most fun abilities because of that. The ability only appears in 2 Kirby games, and it's only in Planet Robobot as a hidden Easter egg, but I think that's what makes it so special. It's a treat whenever you get to use Smash Bros. Kirby, so it needed to be one of the best. Fighter feels like an ability that was really thought out, especially in the modern games. It's great for dealing with enemies, great for dealing with bosses, strong, fast, all of the attacks flow into each other really well. It really does feel like playing as a fighting game character in an action platformer. They even went as far as to give Kirby a command input. That's dedication to the source inspiration. Beetle is like a combination between Sword, Suplex, and Wing, which is a wild group of abilities to combine. It's a surprising mix of graceful, fluid movements with weighty power that really shouldn't make sense. Yet Beetle exists and proves to be a fantastic ability with loads to offer. I was worried it was going to stay relegated to Triple Deluxe, but thankfully it returned in Star Allies, where it's just as good as it ever was. UFO is the OG powerful, versatile, and ultra rare ability, and rightfully so. With a full range of movement, ladders notwithstanding, multiple powerful projectiles that can be charged for different effects, it's an ability I would use as much as I can, if it wasn't so rare. It's usually relegated to the end of the adventure or secret rooms. In Kirby Planet Robobot, it's either a 100% completion bonus or locked behind an amiibo. And in its first few appearances, you can't even take it out of levels. If it was more accessible, it would easily take the #1 spot. But it still stands proudly as a unique, special, and powerful ability. So, Tornado's broken. Like, Tornado is the most overpowered ability in the series, and it's insane. I did say Stone is my go-to boss ability, but that's only if Tornado isn't available. Tornado makes Kirby completely invincible, it's easy enough to control, and once you learn the timing for when the tornado attack stops, it's near impossible to take damage with this ability. And yet, it's still a blast to use. Return to Dreamland gave it some more versatility, but the tornado attack still remains as deadly as always, and it's a really fun ability to use, in addition to just being the best in whatever game it appears in. And now, we've reached my personal favorite Kirby ability. #1 and the top of S tier. If you've been keeping track, you might know what it is, but if you don't know yet, then let me say that Yo-Yo is my favorite copy ability. It's based on a very creative idea. It's strong. It has a lot of different attacks that are a ton of fun to use, and the attacks combo super well into each other. If it wasn't clear that this ability is cool, Kirby wears a backwards hat, like come on dude. Yo-Yo is a shining example of what makes a copy ability great. It would have been pretty high just from its appearance in Superstar, but Star Allies brought it back and you can walk the dog. This is an S tier ability through and through. And that's the tier list of my favorite Kirby copy abilities. Let me know if your list differs from mine. In a series with powers as diverse as Kirby's, I'm sure everyone's got a different group of favorites. Kirby and the Forgotten Land is just around the corner, and I can't wait to see how the new abilities play, as well as how the old abilities have evolved. That's it for me though. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't, and thanks for watching.